In the language of the deck, the moon does not speak of light. It speaks of illusion, primal terror, and the secrets that crawl out when darkness swallows the landscape. It is the card of mass hysteria, where shadows twist into monsters and an entire community loses its mind to fear. Tonight, we pull file 003 from a lower drawer. Welcome back to Bramble and Bone. This is the story of the Beast of Bladenboro. In the final days of December 1953, winter hadn't fully settled over Bladen County, North Carolina. The air hung thick, heavy with damp mineral tang of blackwater cypress swamps, decaying oak leaves, and pine sap. To the folks living near the edge of Big Swamp, the woods were an open book. They knew the rhythmic hum of the cicadas in summer, the low grunt of wild boars in the mud, the sudden flash of a bobcat breaking through the briars. These were men and women who had hunted these bottomlands for generations. They understood the food chain. They knew what belonged in the dark and what didn't. But on December 29th, near the small farming outpost of Clarkton, that ancient understanding snapped. It was late afternoon when two local farmhands noticed an unsettling shift at the tree line. The birds had gone dead silent. Emerging from the dense underbrush was a shape, sleek, muscle-bound, and pitch black. It was roughly 5 feet long from snout to tail, staying low to the cold soil, moving with a fluid, terrifying grace that didn't match any stray dog or feral cat in the county. It glided along the pine row for a fleeting moment before melting back into the shadows of Big Swamp like liquid mercury. The men laughed it off at the country store that night, chalking it up to twilight playing tricks on tired eyes. A big panther maybe, an overgrown hound. But 48 hours later, on New Year's Eve, the laughter died. Midnight was approaching in Bladenboro. Johnny Voss stepped onto his back porch into the biting night air to check on his hunting dogs before turning in. The night was eerily still. No wind in the pine canopy, no distant highway hum, just an absolute suffocating quiet. When Voss reached the kennels, he didn't find animals that had been fought or hunted. He found a carnage that looked almost methodical. His prized hounds lay broken in the dirt. Their lower jaws had been completely crushed with tremendous force. Their skulls fractured, their tongues torn away. But the detail that turned Johnny Voss's stomach cold wasn't the violence. It was the lack of blood. Despite massive tissue lacerations and ripped throats, there was not a single drop, single pull, staining the dirt or the pine straw beneath the carcasses. The bodies were completely dry, drained even. By morning, Police Chief Roy Flores was standing in Voss's driveway, notebook in hand. Over the next 72 hours, his phone didn't stop ringing. From farmstead to farmstead, across the perimeter of Big Swamp, the reports poured in with horrifying consistency. Dead livestock, crushed jawbones, chewed tongues, and bone-dry crime scenes. Chief Flores pulled two of the best tracking bloodhounds in the county out to the Voss farm to pick up the predator's scent while it was fresh. These were seasoned, aggressive hunting dogs. Dogs trained to run down black bears and corner wild boars without flinching. Chief Flores snapped off their leads near the edge of the property line. The hounds caught the scent immediately, but they didn't bark. They didn't even chase. Instead, their hair stood dead on end. The dogs let out a low, terrified whimper, dropped their tails between their legs, and backed away from the tree line, flatly refusing to step a single inch into the black shadows of Big Swamp. Up until January 5th, 1954, the creature had remained an unseen phantom, a shadow that left behind broken bones and bloodless bodies in the dead of night. But as dusk fell on that chilly Tuesday evening, the phantom finally stepped into the light. 21-year-old Miss C.E. Kinlaw lived in a small, rural home situated just off a dirt access road bordering Big Swamp. Her husband was away, and her young child was sleeping inside. Around 8:30 p.m., Miss Kinlaw stepped out onto her porch to pull in clothes from the wash line. The moon was high in the sky, casting long, pale silver bars across the yard. As she reached for a bedsheet, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. Creeping along the wood piles at the edge of her yard was a shadow. It stayed impossibly low to the ground, its body stretching 5 feet from head to tail. As it turned towards the porch, the moonlight caught its eyes, glowing with a fierce yellowish-green luminescence. Miss Kinlaw froze in her tracks. The creature didn't bolt. It didn't hesitate. It began to stalk slowly toward the porch steps, its muscular shoulders rising and falling with calculated precision. As it closed the distance, it opened its jaws and released a sound that Miss Kinlaw would later describe to investigators as something that burned itself into her memory. A piercing, high-pitched scream that sounded like a woman being murdered in the dark. To a sensational city journalist, that description sounded very far-fetched. But to a wildlife biologist, it is a terrifying, unmistakable signature. Female cougars and panthers and estrus emits a vocalization known as a caterwaul, often described as a sharp, guttural screech so remarkably human-like that even modern wildlife officials routinely receive frantic emergency calls from campers convinced a woman is being attacked in the wilderness. Miss Kinlaw wasn't suffering from hysteria or a hyperactive imagination. She was describing the exact vocal mating call of a massive, solitary feline. Terrified, Miss Kinlaw bolted inside. She slammed the heavy wooden door and threw the iron deadbolt just as the heavy thud of paws landed on her porch boards. She waited in the dark with a kitchen knife in hand, listening as the creature slunk off into the brush. When Chief Roy Forrest arrived at the Kinlaw homestead early the next morning, he knelt in the damp clay of her driveway. There, clearly imprinted in the dirt, were track impressions unlike he had ever seen. They weren't the long, clawed prints of a black bear. They weren't the narrow tracks of a stray timber wolf. They were broad, rounded, cat-like tracks, measuring over 4.5 inches across, larger than a silver dollar. News spread like wildfire through Bladen County. The creature wasn't just killing livestock in remote pastures anymore. It was coming up onto porches. It was stalking human homes. That same night, less than 2 miles away, Barry Lewis heard his dog screaming in the yard. By the time he made it outside with his shotgun, his dog was sadly dead. Its neck snapped, its jaw crushed, its body entirely drained of blood. Hours later, farmer Ford Hammonds reported losing a hog to the same silent executioner. Wilderness experts and local veterinarians were baffled. North Carolina cougars had officially been declared extinct in the region decades prior. Furthermore, mountain lions kill by suffocating prey and dragging carcasses away to bury underbrush. They don't crush skulls for fun. They don't leave bodies intact and completely dry of blood. The newspapers had officially found their story. The headlines across the state began printing a name in big, bold, black ink. The Beast of Bladenboro. By January 7th, 1954, Bladenboro was no longer just a sleepy timber town of 800 people. It was the epicenter of a national media frenzy. Associated Press wire reports splashed the story across national papers from New York to Los Angeles. Radio broadcasters sensationalized the Vampire Cat of North Carolina. And then, the hunters came. Between January 6th and January 8th, an estimated 1,000 heavily armed men descended on Bladen County. They came from every corner of the South. Big game trackers from Tennessee, local farmers with double-barreled shotguns, professional dog handlers, curiosity seekers, and even a busload of UNC Chapel Hill fraternity brothers carrying pistols and beer coolers. The quiet fog-draped pine barrens of Big Swamp were transformed overnight into a chaotic, dangerous war zone. At night, the swamps lit up with hundreds of sweeping flashlight beams and lanterns. The air smelled of gasoline, tobacco smoke, and gun oil. Dogs barked incessantly. Nervous, armed men fired wildly into the shadows at every rustling palmetto leaf or snapping twig. Police Chief Roy Flores quickly realized he was facing two monsters: whatever was lurking in the swamp and the armed mob that had taken over his town. In a desperate bid to draw the creature out, Chief Flores publicly proposed tying up live dogs as bait along the edge of Big Swamp to lure the beast into an ambush. But the plan was hastily aborted when wildlife officials realized that putting hundreds of twitchy, intoxicated hunters around a bait line in total darkness was a guaranteed recipe for human slaughter. Chief Flores issued a stern warning over local radio. If you are going into the swamp, wear bright-colored clothing, stay in groups, and watch your trigger fingers. We have more guns in this county right now than deer. Yet, despite 1,000 men combing the cypress bogs with high-powered rifles, the beast seemed mockingly invisible. Hunters would report hearing that bone-chilling woman scream, echoing from the deep water, only to track towards the sound and find nothing but empty mud and silver dollar paw prints leading directly into deep, impassable sinkholes. It was as if the creature knew the terrain better than any human ever could. It slipped right between the search lines, silent as a ghost, leaving the army of hunters chasing shadows in the fog. By January 12th of 1954, Bladenboro was reaching a dangerous breaking point. Mayor Woodrow Fussell knew it was only a matter of time before an accidental gunshot killed a hunter in the dark, or the town's economy was completely paralyzed by panic. He needed a resolution, and he needed it fast. On January 13th, a local farmer named Luther Davis was checking his steel traps deep along the perimeter of Big Swamp. In one of his sets, he found a 30-pound male bobcat deceased. It was a large bobcat for the area, certainly, but it was standard wildlife. Mayor Fussell didn't care. He seized the opportunity. He had the bobcat brought into town, tied up by its hind legs, and hung high from a flagpole in the center of Bladenboro. Mayor Fussell called an emergency press conference, smiled for the news cameras, and declared to the nation, "The beast of Bladenboro is dead. The hunt is officially over. Everyone go home." The press printed the story, the crowd dissipated, and the army of hunters packed their trucks and drove home. But behind closed doors in Bladen County, none of the locals were buying it. Local hunters, wildlife biologists, and Chief Roy Flores himself knew the mayor's declaration was a political stunt. A 30-pound bobcat is roughly the size of a medium beagle in comparison. It lacks the jaw strength to crush the skull of a bloodhound. It cannot snap the neck of a full-grown hog. It does not leave 4.5-inch paw prints in the driveway clay. And then there is the detail that fueled nationwide panic. The sensationalized claims that the predator was a vampire cat that sucked its victims completely dry of their blood. When you apply modern veterinary forensics to the scene, a far clearer and much grimmer picture emerges than supernatural blood drinking. Apex felids, like jaguars or cougars, do not slash arteries to let prey bleed out. They strike with an incredible hydraulic jaw power, biting directly down onto the back of the neck, skull, or windpipe. This extreme blunt force trauma causes rapid, massive internal hemorrhaging. The animal's blood doesn't spill onto the pine straw. It pools internally within the chest. To a farmer inspecting a dead hound under a flashlight beam on a cold night, the total absence of external blood pools made the body appear to be sucked dry. But in forensic reality, it wasn't supernatural drainage. It was the mechanical footprint of an apex predator killing with absolute precision. So what was the beast of Bladenboro? Over the decades, researchers and zoologists have settled on 3 distinct possibilities. 1. The exotic escapee. Could it have been an illegal melanist jaguarundi or black panther that escaped from a private exotic collection or a traveling circus? South American jaguars possess the exact crushing bite style that targets the skull and jawbones of prey, a habit identical to the kills documented in Bladenboro. 2. The Relict Cougar. Was it one of the last surviving black panthers of the deep southern swamps, forced out of hiding by harsh winter conditions? Or 3. Mass hysteria. Could it have been a combination of feral dogs, wild bobcats, and a collective small-town panic, amplified by sensational 1950s headlines? Whatever it was, after Mayor Fussell hung that bobcat on the flagpole, the killings along Big Swamp abruptly stopped. The predator either died in the deep cypress bogs, migrated south towards the coastal marshes, or simply melted back into the shadows from which it came. The files on Bladenboro were closed, but the swamp remains. And if you ask the old-timers who still live near the edge of cypress trees on a quiet January night, they'll tell you that when the wind blows just right from the south, you can still hear something screaming in the dark, sounding just like a woman with a knife in her back. Thank you for stepping into the archive tonight. Until next time, lock your doors, check your tree lines, and keep your lamps burning bright. This is Bramble and Bone.